Thank you for joining us today. We would like it's our honor to have you here with us today to share about startups and investment as well. So we would like to have some questions for you. The first one would be, as an international investor in many fields, in your investment portfolio, which industry and countries have the large proportion in your portfolio? And can you share the reason why?
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here in Vietnam. Answering your question, I have investments in different countries in Europe, Portugal, Spain, UK, Estonia, Finland, France. That's it. And in US, Canada as well. So I have different fields. One of my largest investments is in a resin company, which is an industrial company that produces resin for ink.
Yeah.
But I have also companies in the IT field, in AI. So I have a different, I don't have just one sector.
Yeah.
What for me is important is that if the entrepreneurs have mitigated the risk of the project and they know the way forward, so that they know how to navigate the challenge ahead. For me, that is the most important thing.
Yeah, and like talking about different industry and countries, do you have like the main, I know that you invested in many countries and many industry, but is there any specific countries or industry that you put like the major proportion of your investment in?
Probably the biggest proportion of my investment is in Spain,
Yeah.
Followed by Portugal, and then the other countries. The reason is the opportunities that came were in those countries. Nowadays, it's very easy for a company to change headquarters. Mm-hmm. So a company, for instance, I was investor in several Portuguese companies, and they moved the headquarters to US. So I became investor in a US company because they moved. So the location is not today the most important thing, because the markets are global, and a company can grow very fast in any country.
Yeah. And can you also share about the reason why you focus on some specific industry like resin or IT and AI?
I think it's, as I said before, it's about opportunities. The resin came to me as a potential investment, and I liked entrepreneurs. They mitigated a lot the risks, and the potential was there, and I was right. And the company is very successful. In the first year, we did 24.5 million euros revenues in the first year.
Wow.
So it's a company called United Resins. It's a very good company. And it depends always in terms of the company, and I don't focus so much in terms of the location. Of course, if it's a location that it's very difficult for me to find lawyers to understand the papers, then it's more difficult. But if it's, for instance, in Europe, in any jurisdiction, it's okay for me to invest.
Yeah, thank you. That's some impressive numbers there. So in your book, Zero Risk Startup, you believe that the way investors think about risk is different from the way that business people think about risk. Can you share more about that difference?
Yeah, so entrepreneurs usually think about the potential, and they want to convince the investors about the potential. Mm-hmm. But the investors are aware that there is a high mortality of companies in startups. For instance, GEM, as the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, they analyzed data, and according to them, only 1 in 10 founders are able to survive in good conditions. So this means that most of the startups will fail. So this is the perceived risk from the investors, and they don't want to invest in startups because they perceived more risk.
Yeah, thank you. And we don't really know how the available data reflects, but as far as we know, the Vietnamese investor tend to focus on some investment or area that they think that they think are safe, but in fact they are not. They are carrying really high risk. For example, like stock, Bitcoin, real estate, or gold. While those Vietnamese investors, they hesitate to invest in innovative sectors. Is it a unique situation in Vietnam? And how do you think? Like, how does it compare to the investment environment in other countries around the world?
I think the situation is more or less common around the world. There are a lot of people that invest in Bitcoin and stocks, and but they don't invest in startups.
Yeah.
And when you say that they believe it's safer to invest in Bitcoin and in stocks or gold, and not in startups, I need to admit that they are right in terms of the risk perception that they have, because let's take Bitcoin for instance. So in terms of a market, let's compare a market of a startup. If someone invests in a startup, the person doesn't know if the startup will have a market. With Bitcoin, person knows that people buy Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
there is no need of marketing for Bitcoin, spend marketing, because people buy. If we go to the entrepreneur, I'm talking about the risks that I talk about in my book, which are the market, the entrepreneur, the financial risk, the legal risk, and the operational risk. So in terms of the market, probably people perceive less risk in Bitcoin or stock than investing in a startup, because that is the reason. And there is another thing is about the liquidity. Liquidity is very, very important, because in a startup, you have liquidity only after 6-7 years when there is an exit. And in Bitcoin, it's just seconds. You just sell the Bitcoin. You can lose money, but you can sell Bitcoin. In terms of the team risk, in Bitcoin there is no team risk. There is no team risk. So this is completely mitigated. Yeah. And in a startup, you have the team risk. Maybe the team is not ready. Then if we go to the financial risk, in a startup, if the startup is not good, you lose all the money probably, because the company goes bankrupt. In Bitcoin, it's very difficult that you lose all the money, because if Bitcoin starts coming down, even if it goes down one day 10%, another day 10%, you can sell. Yeah. So you say, okay, my loss is 20%. Mm-hmm. In terms of the financial risk, it's very important about this misconception about risk taking. People invest in Bitcoin, but invest what, $1,000? It's not comparable investing $100,000 in a startup or investing on their market. So when we say that people are not risk averse because they invest in Bitcoin, they invest $1,000 is below their acceptable level of risk. Mm-hmm. And people, if they are on their acceptable level of risk, they invest. But startups, most of the startups, the people need to invest more money than their acceptable level of risk. And then we have the operational risk. In Bitcoin, there is not really big deal in terms of operational risk. It takes 5 minutes to enter in a platform and sell. Yeah. While in a startup, there are a lot of things that can go wrong in terms of operational. So people perceive that it's safer to invest in Bitcoin. And then there is a psychological aspect that I would like also to mention, is about blaming others for failures. Mm-hmm. So if someone lost money in Bitcoin, millions of people have lost money in Bitcoin, and so he was just a victim of that. But if you invest in a company, in a startup, and there are 10 investors, he cannot blame others because he was the one choosing. So he prefers not to invest because he can lose the money as well. So the perceived risk of investing in a startup for people is higher than the perceived risk investing in gold or investing in Bitcoin.
Yeah. So there are those investors, they are not wronged at all.
If they are able to mitigate the risk of the startup, to identify the risk and see the potential, they can identify that it's better to invest in a startup because the outcome can be better. If the startup has mitigated the key risks, the probability of that startup to fail is very, very low. So it's much better to invest in a startup than in stock because people earn a lot of money. In the stories in many markets, for instance in Vietnam, I'm sure there is 1,000 stories online of people that made 10x in selling Bitcoin, making a fortune.
Yeah,
but you don't see stories about people making 10x in startups because they are not known. So the public opinion may think that what is good is to invest in Bitcoin and gold, etc., because they talk about the success stories, but they don't talk usually about the disasters that people lost a lot of money.
Yeah, so there's some availability bias there as well.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. And is the situation is the same in other countries compared to Vietnam?
No, there is a big difference in many countries. First is the governments in many countries have come to the place and understand that there is this perceived risk, so they need to mitigate the risk for the investors. And for instance, in UK, there are two instruments, which is the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, that investors that invest in startups can deduct up to 50 or 75% of their investment. So imagine that someone invests £100,000 in a business, they can deduct immediately 50% of that. So it reduces half of the risk. So the investor thinks, hey, this is not so much risk. Another thing that exists also in Europe is these crowdfunding platforms to invest in startups. And so people can invest as well $1,000, £1,000 in a company. And people understands that this is little risk. It's below their acceptable level of risk. So they are okay to do those kind of investments. And another thing is a lot of startups in Europe, they come already with assessments, statements from universities saying that the technology works. They come with the freedom to operate statements from lawyers. They come from with search from IP, understanding that their IP can be patented. Right. They come with letters of intent from clients saying that they want to buy the product, that they have tested the product. They come with, and so all these kind of instruments reduce the risk. Yeah. And there are a lot of accelerators, incubators that help to mitigate the risk. So the perceived risk for investors in Europe, many European countries, when a company comes from incubator or accelerator, the perceived risk is much less. Yeah. Than just coming with an entrepreneur with just some idea.
Yeah, so it's really important to have the environment to support these startups and entrepreneurship.
Reliable environment, because if you have statements from reliable universities or reliable labs, this is important. If you have statements from a university that nobody knows about, it's not reliable. So for the investor, it doesn't change.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your sharing. And the next question is, the Vietnamese startups often believe that risk is the attractive point of starting the business. If the risk is reduced, they feel less excited Of course, the failure rate of startup in Vietnam is very high, and it's very difficult to scale up. What advice do you have for those who are passionate about taking such high risk?
I think there is a misconception there because the data that is available shows that Vietnamese people are among the most risk-averse people in terms of creating startups. When you say that people like the excitement of risk, probably they like excitement of adrenaline, which is something different because to set up a company, a business, it takes months, years to make it successful in many cases, and it requires permanent focus of the entrepreneur. This is not a 100 meters race. Mm-hmm. This is a marathon. And for those that want quick adrenaline, then they can invest in Bitcoin because then they have adrenaline every hour, every minute to see if the stock goes up, goes down. That's where you can get adrenaline. But for entrepreneurs, it needs more than just adrenaline. So the data shows that Vietnamese people are risk averse, not the opposite. If that should be true, that people are not risk averse, then there would be more companies created. It's very important when you create a company that you mitigate the risk. Otherwise, it happens what you mentioned. And if you consider that high failure rate exists, and it's a pity because it's a loss of talent. People are spending money, people are destroying their lives, people are spending the time, and the perceived risk that comes to the market is that this is a disaster because everyone loses money. For entrepreneurs, there is no problem of failure if they fail fast and cheap. Yeah. So failing fast and cheap is not a problem. Yeah. But they need to understand risk mitigation because this is what ensures long-term success. This is not a race of 100 meters, this is a marathon, and they need to be ready for the marathon. For 100 meters, you probably don't need food, you don't need water, you don't need vests because you run 100 meters. Yeah. But for a marathon, you need to understand that you need water, you need probably food, you need a vest because it will be cold, you need proper shoes. Yeah. And entrepreneur that wants just adrenaline runs 100 meters and is out. Yeah. I agree that most of Vietnamese people are risk averse, but for sure there's some certain number of people who are really love taking risk. And for example, for those people who have the idea of starting a business, for example, do you have any advice for them? Look, this is not a game of adrenaline. This is a game of success. Yeah. So if they are on the game of adrenaline and they want to risk, there are a lot of other things that they can do. They can drive a plane if they don't have a license to drive a plane. They can swim in a dirty river that it's not proper. They can go to the forest where there are tigers and run into if they like risk, you know. But if they want to create a company, a successful company, they need to create infrastructure. They need to think ahead of the risks and to mitigate them. Because when they mitigate the risks, they will be much more successful. They will grow much faster, and they will have the probability of success increases dramatically. And they will be in a better position to get funding from investors and from banks as well. Yeah, thank you for your advice. And when advising countries to encourage startups, what do you see what trends do you see in the governments of those countries in terms of policy to support startups? Look, I've advised many governments around the world, and there is one common thing that they always say: we have fantastic startups, very innovative startups. We just need investors. That's what they all tell, but they don't understand that in countries, for instance, like UK, there is this tax incentive. So why UK investor would come to Vietnam, just to give an example of Vietnam, to invest in a Vietnamese company, if they have very good companies as well in UK, where they can deduct 50% of their investment immediately. So in terms of governments, there are a lot of policies that they have done. But one policy is tax breaks for sure, that this can be used, and this puts a lot of people investing in startups. Second is creation of co-investment funds. So the government says to the startups, to the investors, if you invest in a startup, I also invest in that startup. And if the startup is successful, you can buy my share, my government share, with some interest rates. So the upside for the investors. So this is asymmetric exit for investors is very, very important. And but what the government can do, instead of giving grants to entrepreneurs that many governments do, because they think it's popular to give grants because everyone claps. But in reality, and I talk about this in my book, is they create a grantpreneur community that are addicted to grants and not addicted to clients. And that is a problem. So what government can do, if the government is really serious about supporting startups, is smart procurement. Put the government to buy from smart companies, allow them to grow, because the companies, they don't need money. They need clients, because if they have clients, then they will also have money, and they can easily get money from banks as well. That's one thing that the governments can do. Another thing that they can do is to provide the startups assessment statements for their technology. So they buy these assessment statements from reliable labs around the world, so that the startup can show investors, can show the stakeholders that the product has those features and as that performance, and help to entrepreneurs to mitigate the risk. Because the biggest problem in the world in terms of entrepreneurship is just that 10% of the people that want to be entrepreneurs, they are entrepreneurs. That's around 10% around the world. And in Vietnam, for sure, it's the same number. And if you can just mitigate the risk, the perception of risk for the entrepreneur, if he mitigates the risk, then he doesn't see risk, and then he starts the company. You can double, triple very easily the number of companies just supporting entrepreneurs to mitigate risk. So governments should support entrepreneurs mitigating risk instead of giving grants. Giving grants is not the way to go forward.
Yeah. So in summary, it's the government, the major trends from the government should be like tax brackets, the support, co-investment, and the assessment and
smart procurement.
Okay.
And also then create the assessments, and they can also create two more things, which is test beds. So to have environments where companies can test the products and show to the clients. For instance, imagine that the government has a renewable center where some entrepreneurs that have pieces of renewable energy engines, they can just go there and test the product and show the clients that it works, instead of the entrepreneur need to hire a lot of money. Another thing, for instance, that is very easy is on a normal, or not on, let's say, innovative economy, is about food. A lot of entrepreneurs want to create food businesses, but the first thing they need to create industrial kitchen. So they need to invest $100,000, $200,000. They need to rent a space. They need to get a license. They need to have people. There's a lot of cost. So what they do is they try to find investors, but because it's too risky, then the investors don't invest. So the entrepreneur doesn't start a company. But governments and municipalities and churches and religious institutions, they have a lot of industrial kitchens that work during the day for lunch. At night they are empty. So why cannot these entities make these industrial kitchens available for entrepreneurs that they pay per use.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs can start tomorrow, not wait 6 months or 1 year or never. So, and this can be, so there are a lot of idle assets that the state and the municipalities have, machinery, labs, university labs, for instance. Government gives money to university labs, but when an entrepreneur wants to test something, it's a big problem. They charge a lot of money, so nothing happens. So the government, instead of giving just the money to the labs, they could say, we give you the money for the lab, but you need to allow 20 entrepreneurs per month to test the product under your supervision. So risk mitigation is the most important thing that any government can do, because this will increase dramatically the number of startups and their success as well.
Yeah. So in Vietnamese, we have the idiom that don't give them the fish, give them the fishing rod.
But for many politicians, they prefer to give the fish because they take pictures and it comes in the press. I'm not talking about Vietnam, I'm talking about in general. We see this in Europe a lot.
Yeah, it looks more appealing. So in the context of the challenging world economy, what advice do you have for startups and the Vietnamese government specifically?
Look, there are a lot of challenges, you know, about, for instance, the Trump taxes in products. And this can be seen as a disadvantage, but for Vietnam, I think you can benefit from this war between China and US, and you can benefit from Chinese companies installing themselves here in Vietnam, and I think that's something that Vietnam can benefit. Another thing that I think Vietnam can use and is not using, as far as I know, because I talk with a lot of them, is the Vietnamese diaspora. I live in London. I know a lot of Vietnamese entrepreneurs and businessmen there. They have money, they have access to the market, but there is no connection with startups from Vietnam. So the government should create a program for a co-investment fund with the Vietnamese diaspora, not just because of the money, because to help them to access local markets. Imagine Vietnamese businessmen in US, Germany, Cambodia as well, because there is a big community there. You have 5 million people outside of Vietnam that are from the diaspora. If 1% would be willing to support entrepreneurs, then it's 50,000. If 1 in 1,000, it's 5,000 businessmen supporting entrepreneurship. Don't you think that there is 1 in 1,000 outside that would like to support Vietnamese companies, access the market? This is something that is gold that you have, and the government should create a program to incentivize this diaspora to support the growth of Vietnam.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of Vietnamese living abroad, and they are willing to make connections and helping the Vietnamese startup to go abroad. So I agree that the Vietnamese government can consider that.
Should create a program, but it's not just a program that a website where they put. You need to create an incentive, because the risk aversion is also there as well. So we need to say, okay, if you invest in a company, I also invest in that company. So basically, instead of you investing 200,000, you just need to invest 100,000. I invest the other 100,000, and if the company is successful, then you can buy my 100,000 for little money above the 100,000. So the upside is a lot. So instead of investing 200,000, he invests 100, but in reality, he has the upside of 200,000.
Yeah, thank you for your idea. And also, is there any advice for Vietnamese startups, except the ones that you already given?
I think the Vietnamese startups, I think if you want to go abroad, think about trying to connect with Vietnamese people outside, because they know your language, they know your culture, they understand you, so they can support you. Make sometimes co-founder abroad. So imagine that you're a Vietnamese company, but you have a co-founder in Los Angeles or in London or in Paris. It makes your company immediately global. So this is something that you could think about and try to mitigate the risk of your startup. Because if the risk is below your acceptable level of risk, then you should just move forward. And more important, buy the book.
Actually, I want to ask you one more question about Sandbox. So there's some cities in Vietnam already implementing the Sandbox program. So can you share more about this type of program and what's the difference between Sandbox and testbed, for example?
I think Sandbox is a very good initiative from the government because it de-risks the risks of startups. So the Sandbox is used by governments in new sectors because they don't know the technologies and they want to learn about them. And so basically they grant a license, a special license to innovative companies to test their technologies in a specific location or region or city. For instance, imagine that you want to test drone deliveries. So a government can, and the legislation doesn't allow drone deliveries. You can find a government that says, okay, in my city you can test drone deliveries, we will grant a license. So Sandbox is very, very important in terms of license because it allows legally a startup to test the innovation. The difference between Sandbox and the testbed is the testbed is a place where there is an infrastructure where you can test your products. So, and not just about the license, but a place where you can test. So imagine that the government has a building where entrepreneurs that want to test things like sensors for entrance, sensors for temperature, lighting, floor materials, they can test, for instance. That is a test bed. So, and then they can invite the potential clients or investors to see the technology working. Testbed is also important because it allows the entrepreneurs to test the products in real conditions and get data and improve it. So, Sandbox is very important. Testbed probably is more important than Sandbox in many industries. Of course, very innovative industries. Sandbox, if you cannot, if you need a license, but the license is not available, then Sandbox is important as well. Both are great initiatives to de-risk startups, and it's a good initiative and should be more spread.
Yeah, per my understanding, testbed is like for when the government apply the testbed, they become like early adopters of.
No, that's smart procurement. It's a different. So testbed is it doesn't mean that the government is buying anything. It just allows the entrepreneurs to test things in a specific place, and they have all the instruments to measure the success of the entrepreneur product there.
Yeah, thank you. And like based on your experience, those testbed, what's the outcome of the testbed, and would it possible for the startup to get the government procurement after the testbed?
Of course, if they get the testbed and they show that the technology works, then they can invite the government and say, look, this technology really works. Come here to see it. And then the government sees that the technology works. So for the government, the perceived risk disappears because they've seen the data, they've seen the technology working in the testbed. And that's where the smart procurement then can come in because the entrepreneurs have shown that the technology works.
Yeah. Do you think there's a difference in regarding the policy in different countries or regions, for example, like Vietnamese government or Asian government, for example, have like different trends in that policy compared to Western countries?
I think it's in many countries, it depends on the leadership and understanding of entrepreneurship. in some countries, and I'm not talking about Vietnam at all because I don't know very well the reality of Vietnam, so I don't want to be misunderstood here. But in many countries, you see politicians that understand that risk is the key point of startups, key point for entrepreneurs to start businesses because they are afraid of risk, or investors to invest in startups. And so they create a lot of instruments to mitigate the risk. I don't see a difference between Europe or Asia on that aspect. Despite in Europe there are more tax breaks and co-investment funds than in Asia, that is for sure. But Asia has also, for instance, mutual guarantee institutions, very, very strong, which is also exists also in Europe. I think it's about leadership. So if you could have people that are leading these governments in terms of their understanding about entrepreneurship and the risk that is the key point of startups, then they can easily create a lot of innovations and big success in terms of startups.
Yeah, thank you so much for your sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.